Great. Well, thank you for everybody joining us. I appreciate diaries are extremely busy. And this session should take about 45 minutes just to run you through our research findings that we had. And also what I thought it'd be useful to do is outline the other learnings that we've gained with working with energy utility companies and other companies, because I think although each sector is different in its own right, there are some commonalities which are starting to develop as we start to move through and understand this new world and all the challenges that we're facing. So we've called it forces of disruption, and we've also looked at how we can utilize coaching as the main driver to help individuals primarily in the energy and utility sector, but as I say, across all those sectors. So first of all, welcome. I thought I'd cover just a little bit about us, so I put this into context with you. And then I'm going to set the context for this new world, what we're noticing, and a lot of this obviously is in the global news, so it's nothing new. But I just wanted to give you our view, our spin on that, and also some research that we've done around the energy and utilities sector. I'll show you the research findings from the research that we've done. And then what I'm going to do at the end is just share other learning that we've gained, not just within the research itself, but just general learning as when we've been working with clients in this sector, but also others, and just give you some ideas, some food for thought that you may want to take away and explore further. So a little bit about me, just so you know where this is coming from. I've been in the coaching world for 20+ years now, and I've worked extensively across all sectors, lots of different organizations. And I guess the key thing that sits within all of those is people. And it's understanding how to maximize the potential of those individuals and help them learn and grow and develop and obviously perform in their roles. And we call it simply playing their best game. We've worked across shop floor to C-suite. So we work with a number of CEOs and their teams. And I would say our approach is very values driven, but also we are pragmatists at heart. We like to understand what works at work, and that was part of the drive behind doing this research, to see what we could learn and what we could then adjust in the approach that we take. I'm very lucky. I do what I love, and I love what I do, which is coaching. And our simple mantra or purpose is coaching for a better tomorrow. And we help individuals, teams, and organizations be better than they were yesterday, i.e. coaching tomorrow. Just a little bit about us, Coaching Focus. We are UK based. We're a coaching-led consultancy, but with global reach. A lot of the clients that we work with are multinationals, and with the virtual world now, it means that we can do our work right across the globe at scale, which is great because it means that we get to do more great work with more great people. And simply put, our expertise is in workplace performance coaching. I'd like to think we understand coaching and we know what works within the workplace. And our approach, again, is very much to partner with you as clients, as individuals, and understand your business, your organization, and then co-create together some pragmatic solutions that will help drive and accelerate your change agenda. And as I say, simply put, we are coaching for a better tomorrow. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the background. I'm now going to go into the context and just give you, from our view, what we're noticing and what's going on in this new world that we're now facing. I think it's true to say that we're living in some of the most disruptive times in history, certainly in my lifetime anyway, and I'm certainly over 50, so that's 50 years of times where it's been quite disruptive and challenging for many. And I think the one thing that gets forgotten by a lot of individuals and certainly a lot of organizations because of the pandemic that's impacted and sort of overtaken the news and our approach for going into lockdown, etc. But there is a fourth industrial revolution upon us as well, with technology and the pace of change and all of those things. And then you lay on top of that, and this is the disruptive element, you lay on top of that the global pandemic, the climate concerns, which all of you within the sector will be very conscious of and will have, I'm sure, a clear ESG agenda. And obviously very clear with the issues and challenges of cost of living crisis, not just for your people, but for your customers as well. And we're starting to see that emerge and cause challenges within the political environment, certainly within the UK. Sadly, there's war in UK. And as I say, war in Europe, and as I say, within the UK, government that's in transition. And I put a little note to myself not to mention Liz Truss, but I'm sure we all have a view on that and the disruption that it's caused the economy, and I'm sure your businesses. So I think it's fair to say that the pace and impact of this change is phenomenal, and it shows no sign of slowing down. There's no sort of clarity or understanding about things will become more stable. And I think your leaders find themselves challenged as never before. So part of doing this research and the work we do is understanding how we can support your leaders more effectively so that they can lead in the way that they can do best, and the people that they lead can play their best game. I also wanted, I think it'd be wrong of us not to sort of step back and understand what that sort of fourth industrial revolution meant, and what does that mean for the way that we as people just generally, doesn't matter which sector you're in, need to operate. So we now live in a digitally and technology-led world. It's interesting, some energy companies will call themselves technology companies, not electricity or energy companies. So it's an interesting way in which technology is taking over and starting to change the way in which we work now. I would say that old practices are mostly irrelevant. Some of the paradigms have been challenged with not just lockdown, but other ways of working. But what I find very interesting is that we continue to work in the old ways and expect them to work, which they don't. I would say that with great resignation, or the great rebalance we call this, there's talent attraction, engagement and retention will be critical to organisational sustainable success. And we as HR professionals need to be conscious of that. The other thing we're noticing is that people will demand empowerment and push back against authority. Whether you call this Gen Z, I think it's Gen Alpha it's being called now, but people don't want to be controlled. I don't think they ever have, but now they feel they've got a voice, and they're demanding, they're not just wanting, they're demanding empowerment and pushing back against that command and control authoritative style. So I think for your leaders and for us or for organizations, soft skills, leadership, good effective coaching, empathy, all those soft skills will be invaluable as we move forward for the success for organizations. And I think leaders will need to find better ways of communicating with open-mindedness and exponential thinking will be required, not just from leaders, but from everybody. Thinking isn't now done in a straight line. It's a lot of change, the agile approach to the way that we operate. So being flexible, adaptable ways of working will be the operating ways of the norm. And I think coaching has such a key part to play in that, to help people to understand how to think for themselves and take responsibility and ownership. But like all these things, there's a but there, and we'll talk more about that but on what we're noticing, and some of the challenges are moving from that sort of shift from organizational growth, where people want personal growth and well-being. And you'll see well-being and mental health come up a lot through these findings. So that's what I think it means for this new world and for people with this industrial revolution and other challenges that we're facing. And I thought it was interesting when we started to look at the research you want to do and some of the clients that we're working with, just understanding that not just the global context and the general context, but the context for your sectors. And I found this article that said, according to Deloitte, utilities' ability to adapt in an uncertain and rapidly changing environment is being challenged by the mature organizational structures, legacy, strategy, and infrastructure. So in a way, the energy and utility sector is sort of like a perfect storm. It's got those changes going on externally, and then it's working in this sort of this system which struggles to be adaptive and in uncertain times. And that was my sort of perception when we started to go into this. The findings, interestingly, show something slightly different, and that will create, I think, an interesting debate. And as we go through this, I'd be interested in people's views at the end to understand that. I think also put on top of that, not just that the sort of the legacy strategy and infrastructure issues and maybe the command and control, but also obviously with the challenges we're facing now in 2022, which create a real combination of disruptive forces. So as Coaching Focus, we wanted to commission some research to understand how we could support and equip senior leaders within the energy and utilities firms to better manage these challenges and address these challenges. And we wanted to explore the role that coaching specifically and coaching cultures can play in supporting those two sectors and adapt and maintain a sustainable performance and ultimately thrive within this context. So we did that. We set out and commissioned a research paper, and we conducted that objectively through a company called Census Wide, and they approached 300 middle and senior managers in the UK, broken down into 250 at energy and utilities firms and 50 across the other sectors, just to provide that comparison. And again, as I say, the findings were really interesting. And certainly when Deloitte made their findings 27, I think you could start to challenge that. So we're going to look at those findings as we go through. So I think the first findings to look at are what your senior managers and your middle managers are concerning them, because that will impact their resilience. That will impact their focus. That will impact their ability to come to work and do their best, play their best game, do their best work that they can do for you. And it's interesting just to see the other, the two sides of senior management and middle management. Here we can see COVID for senior management is still fairly high. For middle management, not so. I think COVID is becoming more of the norm. We're understanding the principles and policies and how to manage that now as leaders and as organizations. The Great Resignation, two different scores here. My view of that is that senior management are trying to bring in other people. Middle managers may not be affected as much as that. So the recruitment side of things and people leaving impacts a senior management probably more than a middle management. But what's highlighting here is the difference with the cost of living. And this is obviously, as you can see from the scores, this is our highest. So not only are your customers concerned with the cost of living, this is having one could say, a major impact on the individuals within your organization to be able to function effectively with the concern of the cost of living. And working with many clients, they're starting to address that and support their colleagues in many different ways. And I guess specifically relevant to your sector, the energy transition and digitization within your industry, although that is a concern, it's not as much as a concern for the cost of living, which is the major concern for all your leaders within your sector. The other evidence or research that we found, and this is the one that surprised us, which is great. We asked questions around a coaching culture compared to a command and control. And the feedback was that 30% of managers described their organization as hierarchical. We thought that might be slightly higher, going back with the research that Deloitte did and the way that a number of other organizations that we work with operate. So that hierarchical command and control is only 30%, which in logic says that 70% are less command and control. But I'll come on to that later, because I think there is also a difference of understanding about what we mean by coaching. And I'll explain that from other research, qualitative research that we have. The other area, 72% of people said that they were provided with coaching and the way that they're led. So again, another really positive score. And again, that surprised us in the level that was. And I put that down to, I hope that people realize as line managers that they've got to support their people through these challenging times, and they are providing that support, and organizations are enabling them to provide that support in a relevant way. But again, I'll come back to just unpicking that a little bit further to understand what they mean by support, and actually, is it coaching that they are providing? So I'll come back to that. There's also 90%, so one of the highest actually scores of people within energy and utilities would find coaching useful. So again, they're saying that support and they would find it useful or are finding it useful. So it's a high score there. And on the right hand side, I think this is again something which has come through in most of the research and feedback that we get. 40% of managers cite poor employee mental health as a challenge in maintaining performance. 40%. Sadly, that's a high number. But with COVID and other challenges that people are facing, that doesn't surprise us. But what we need to do as organizations, if we're going to make people resilient and be able to not just survive but thrive, is make sure that we have the appropriate support in place, not just through line managers, but also within the organization. And I'm sure many of you, certainly those energy and water companies I work with, have got some great programs and initiatives in place. I wanted also to bring that not just from our research, but just from general research within the HR world. And this is an article taken from, or research done by Gartner, which if you haven't signed up to their website, it's free and it's definitely worth joining as an HR professional, because they do have some really good insight and some simple tools to sort of point you in the right direction to support some of these key areas. And what they identified in their research was 5 core trends. The first one, which is about helping individuals move into a hybrid way of working and understanding how to get hybrid ways of working to create that transformation and change. And we've called that transition. And utilizing coaching in these areas is a great way to use coaching more strategically rather than tactically. So how do you use coaching to help people transition back into those new ways of working? The other trend was around more and new skills. You know, the world has changed. What you did 2 years ago as a leader is different to what you need to be doing now. The world has changed. So as the world changes, we as leaders need to change. So skills development was another trend that they identified. And as we saw in our research, 40% here, workforce health has been eroded. So therefore, as organizations, as leaders, we need to find ways of supporting those individuals and supporting their well-being so that they can continue to play their best game sustainably. The fourth one was something which we're noticing quite a lot when we're working with other senior leaders around change programs, is that individuals want to feel understood and valued, and they're not feeling that. And I've put that down as sort of empowering them and supporting them. And I put that down to the changes and transition that we're going through. I don't think people understand what empowerment actually means for them as leaders and for them as a recipient and to be given empowerment. And I'll talk more about that as we go through. And the other one, the final one, is around diversity, equality and inclusion. And I think that was around before COVID and before we started to move to that new world, but people want to feel more inclusive, and I think that will continue as a trend. So I thought it was worth sharing those with you, just to give context to other areas that are starting to develop. So that's our research, and that's our sort of summary of what we're noticing from not just our research, but from other good forms of credible sources. What I want to move into now is, how do we build sustainable and resilient performance? How do we do that within the new world that we're facing? So I wanted to share with you some other findings which may, I hope, give you food for thought to think about how you do this, because I think some of these factors, if we could understand these and make sure that they are in place, certainly around coaching, but I would say around development generally, and moving to a more sustainable ways of operating, and coaching for me plays a key part in that. These are things we need to be understanding. The first thing we're noticing is that when we ask people what they think coaching is, at all levels, senior leaderships down to middle managers and employees, they tell us it's telling someone what to do. Well, telling someone what to do, as most of us know, is not coaching, but it is perceived by others, just providing that directive support by helping somebody. And sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes by helping, it's not helpful, because we're not encouraging in this way that we want to create adaptable, resilient ways of operating. We're not getting the person to take ownership for themselves, because they're always being told. The other thing that we're seeing is that leaders feel that by giving advice, we call it the advice monster, is a way that we should be operating. Giving advice, it's helpful, it's quick, it's easy, it gets the problem solved. But if you think about that, if that's the mindset that leaders have and they're constantly telling others what to do, you're not creating an environment where people think for themselves. You're not creating an environment where people will be agile and adaptive, because they're waiting to be told by the advice monster what to do. So we need to challenge that and understand that. The other piece which we're noticing, I guess, taking points 1 and 2 in, is that people, when we ask them in our programs, and we notice generally in cultures, is it tends to be what we call a more directive culture. So people will listen, but then they'll give advice or guidance, which is the advice monster coming in. We know best. And again, if we stay on that directive part of the left-hand side of that spectrum, then that doesn't encourage learning. It doesn't encourage adaptability, agility, and resilience, that we can think for ourselves and find the solutions ourselves. So it slows an organization down, although it feels like it's being done quicker first. So one of the areas that we certainly work with other clients to build this new approach is to find a balance within this directive and non-directive and create flexibility. So all our programs spend time in the non-directive space, listening, reflecting back, understanding before you seek to be understood. And that's a key part of any transition, and certainly culture, that you need to start to be thinking. You know, Peter Senge called it a learning culture. You know, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And I know that sounds so obvious, but so many leaders do not do that. And I think so many leaders that we meet think they listen well, but when we challenge their listening, they don't. You know, they may be listening, but they're not listening empathetically. They're not listening accurately. They're not present. And if people are to contribute and bring that discretionary behavior, they need to feel not only valued, but listened to as well. The other thing that we're finding generally in just every culture, not just the energy and utilities, is the lack of ability to spot what we call coachable moments. Coaching doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't need to be sit down for an hour and have that time. It can be if you've got that structure and you've got that time to do that. But just 5 minutes by the water cooler, those coachable moments when someone will say, you know, I'm not sure how to do this. That is a coachable moment. Yeah, I'm struggling with this project. That's a coachable moment. Rather than coming in and say, well, this is what you need to do. You might simply ask, what have you thought of so far? Or whatever that might be. And as I say before, the leader's default is very much to push the ideas, the agenda, the authority onto others, rather than pull the solution out and get that other person to what we call do the hard work, do the thinking to find that solution. So again, think about how you can shift from that to that pull rather than a push culture. And when we ask people where they sort of sit within the leadership management spectrum and coaching spectrum, 80% of the people say that most of the time they are managing, 80% of the time, which is huge amounts. And just stop and think about that. If people are managing 80% of the time, the impact that will have on someone's resilience, the impact that will have on someone's well-being, and the impact that will have on someone's discretionary behavior. So it's an area that I want to unpick a little bit further, because I think this is not a quick win, because it isn't just do this and this happens, but it is a mindset shift that organizations need to make sure that we create sustainable and resilient performance. So I would put it to you that a line manager is a leader and needs to wear a leadership hat. I would put it to you that they need to wear a management hat, and strangely they're called a line manager. And then they also ideally should be wearing a coaching hat. And there's 3 hats, and the roles of these 3 hats are slightly different. The leadership hat is about setting the vision and what we call a game worth playing. You know, it's something I understand what you want me to do and why you want me to do it, and I'm excited for it. I get motivated. It's a clear direction. So that's what a leader should be doing. Management is about making sure that people keep to the rules and the boundaries of the game. So we put in place in organizations, we put in policies, processes, targets to make sure that people achieve the game that we're asking them to do, by making sure that they do it in a way that we want them to do it in. And then for us, coaching is very simple. It's about enabling somebody or facilitating somebody to play their best game, because they're clear on the game you want them to play. They're clear on the rules of the game. Now it's supporting them and making sure that they play their best, or helping them to play their best game. And we call this this model three-legged stool of performance, because at the heart of this model is performance. And I'm not saying here at all that coaching is the silver bullet to all the solutions, but what I am saying is that your leaders need to understand which hat to wear when to wear the leadership hat, where to wear the management hat, and when to wear the coaching hat. And my experience, or our experience as a business, is 80%, as we said before, of people say that they best wear their management hat, and that will have an impact. And think about it, if they come to work into your organization with default with their management hat on, the impact that they have on others will be sometimes quite negative, and I'll explain why that is in a second. So a simple win here, and what we talk about on our programs, is asking people to come into work with their coaching hat on and only put their management hat on when they need to use that authority, when they need to take power away from somebody because someone's breaching a rule or not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But what we tend to do, we come in with that management hat on and keep it on all day as the default. And I think we've created organizations where it's hard to take that management hat off because that feels like a lack of control, a lack of power, and no one wants to release that. And what's interesting here is that I've drawn this line down the center because on the left-hand side, when people are wearing that management hat, we are disempowering people. When we go over to the right-hand side and we put our coaching hat, we are empowering people. And it's finding a way, understand that people want to feel valued, they want to feel empowered, they want that ownership and responsibility. How do we make that shift in a way that is sustainable, not just for the leader, not just for the individual, but for the organization as well? Because what we're talking about here is a mindset shift, is changing the operating system that your leaders have from leadership management to leadership coaching. And for me, leadership coaching is the new approach and new ways of leading that organizations will need to have moving forward. And from our experience, organizations and leaders aren't necessarily skilled in that space. They're very skilled in the leadership management piece, but not skilled in the leadership coaching. So for me, it's making sure that your leaders know how to lead, they know how to manage, but more importantly, they understand and know how to coach if we're to create that leadership coaching mindset, which is going to be critical for creating sustainable and resilient performance as we move forward. The final piece here, though, to the jigsaw is not just about the leader. It's not just about the leader knowing how to coach and to put that coaching hat on. For me, what it's about is making sure that we can create what I call the ability to dance. Because if you think about it, organizations, teams, the way that we operate are all built on relationships. And I, as a leader, may be able to coach you very effectively. But if I, as the coachee in this instance, are not willing, ready, and able to be coached, then it's going to feel awkward. It's a bit like dad dancing. You know, if it's awkward, if you don't know the steps, if you don't know how to operate, then the whole scenario comes a little bit awkward and you don't get into what we call flow. It's not enjoyable. You know, it's clunky, it's awkward. And if anything's clunky, awkward, and we just don't enjoy it, then we stop doing it. So part of creating this environment where we can create this resilient performance and this sustainable performance and agile ways of working is not just to develop leaders to be able to do the leadership coaching, but also to develop individuals so they know how to be coached as well. And where we've worked with organizations to do that, the speed and acceleration of that shift from that command and control to that collaborative and connective way of operating has been tenfold faster because everybody's bought into it, everybody understands it. And for me, the utopia is that not just everybody knows how to coach, but everybody also knows how to be coached. And quite simply put, that is what we call democratizing coaching. Coaching is just the way we do things around here. And that is the ideal coaching culture. But putting in place the coaching, the leadership, and the management, what we create is not just a coaching culture, but a performance culture, which is sustainable and resilient. And that's what we need to do. And that's what our research is showing is happening with many organizations, but there's a lot of work to do. And I hope that's been useful in giving you some understanding about what we're learning and just some pointers of areas that you may want to think about for your own organization and some of the changes that you may want to be making at the leadership and the individual level to really create that coaching mindset and create that sustainable and resilient way of working.